Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting us to talk about the project. So myself and Jill are going to be presenting a few ideas today, just giving a little bit of an overview of our project, and hopefully we'll have plenty of time for discussion, because we're not really sure what you might be interested in. So we thought we'd just put a few ideas out there, and then we can talk at great length about any of them, I think. So there's myself, I'm the principal investigator of the study, which is a 3-year investigator award funded by the Wellcome Trust. And Jill, my colleague here, is the senior research fellow on the project. And we also have Tamsin Walker, who's doing a PhD on the project as well. So we're the kind of team. And we also have an illustrator who illustrates quite a lot of our work as we've been going along, Jack Beatty. Yeah, so just really wanted to tell you a little bit about the project and how it came about. So we've been interested for a number of years in critical approaches to mental health, and we've been influenced by MAD studies. And I know some of you heard Daniel Landry's talk, I think it was last week, about MAD studies and MAD Student Society. So we've been interested and involved in the development of MAD studies in the UK and bringing it in away from Canada to the UK. And we've kind of been interested in how that can inform critical mental health thinking. And both me and Jill and Tamsin to some extent have been involved in Asylum magazine for a number of years, which is kind of the radical mental health magazine. And I managed to get a little bit of funding from the Wellcome Trust to look at the first 30 years of Asylum magazine. And when I was doing that, I was also really interested in how cartoons and pictures and poems and different forms were able to contest what we understand to be madness and distress in different ways. And I then started to realize that zines had been making a bit of a comeback. So Asylum magazine started off as a bit of a zine, and a zine is kind of like a informal publication, handmade, handcrafted, a kind of magazine, but not a magazine, a kind of handmade magazine in a way. And they can come in little mini zines and also kind of big collaborative zines. But the basis of their DIY produced, they're not kind of professionally published or printed in that way. And so I realized that zines were making a bit of a comeback, and also that lots of zines were being crafted by people with experiences of madness and distress. And I realized that there was quite a few really interesting ways in which zines were what we've come to call crafting contention about madness and distress. So we're calling these MadZines. And what we mean by that is that there's all sorts of zines out there, and many of them have a mental health focus. And the ones that we're calling MadZines are ones that basically craft contention about what we understand madness and distress to be and how we respond to it in a particular way. So not all mental health zines are MadZines. So for example, there are lots of zines produced, like self-care zines, well-being zines, 10 steps to recovery type zines, that we wouldn't really consider to be MadZines. Whilst they're interesting and they're mental health zines and they may be helpful to people, we sort of see MadZines as being something that's doing something a little bit different. And what we mean by that is they're doing something a little bit different, both in the form and the content. So what we're interested in is how zines, by their very materiality and form, are able to contest the way we understand mental health and distress. And just give you one example of that, about how the kind of unfinalizability or the unlinear kind of final narrative, a recovery narrative that often survivors have contested about, for example, the recovery narrative that's dominated mental health services over the past sort of 10, 15 years. And zines kind of disrupt that, both in terms of the content of them. So Recovery in the Bin, for example, a mental health user group, have made zines which contest the idea of recovery, if you like, but also in the very materiality of zines which allow for a different way of understanding Madness and Distress without a nice kind of linear before, during and after kind of narrative. So we've been doing lots and lots of stuff as part of this project, and our definitions of zines have been evolving. We started the project during the pandemic, so obviously that had implications about what we can do. So really, I just wanted to, I could talk about this endlessly, but wanted to pass on to Jill really just to talk. So she's going to tell you a bit about some of the stuff that we've been doing in the project with zines during the first 2 years. We're now in the third year of our research. So Jill's going to talk to you a little about some of the stuff we've been doing. So I'll pass over to Jill. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. It's really great to be here today. And so I'm talking from Lancaster. I work on the project with H, which is based in Preston. Yeah, so I just thought I'd run through some of the things that we've been doing as H says over these first couple of years. So the first thing, which is perhaps quite self-evident, is that we've been locating MadZines. So that has been a significant aspect of the work, in that although there are, some people might know, zine collections, so there are zine libraries and archives in all sorts of different places. There's a Glasgow zine library, there are zine libraries kind of dotted around the country. Most of them don't have a category as you'd expect for MadZines or these kinds of zines that craft contention. In fact, some of them wouldn't even distinguish mental health zines from other health zines. So we've been visiting collections, and we've been also seeking out zines online. So a lot of people are selling their zines for small amounts of money on Etsy. One of the aspects of zine culture that I guess has always been there has been around swapping and sharing zines. And that's still alive, but also people are selling them. As I mentioned, often people need to recoup the cost of materials for producing zines, obviously. So we've been visiting archives, we've been visiting zine fairs, we've been seeking out zines on Etsy, and we've been putting out a call for MadZines. And increasingly, as the project has gone on, people have been sending us stuff themselves. And interestingly, as we've kind of got further into the research, we have been beginning to see other collections that are perhaps very directly relevant to mental health. So, for instance, Jen Carter has been developing the mental health zine library in the Northeast, and although her collection is broader than the MadZines that we're interested in, we've been developing links with her, which has been great. And last week, Tamsin, who's the PhD researcher on our project, and I went down to Coventry to visit a project called The Pod, which has a zine reading room linked to mental health. So they also had loads of material that was relevant to us. So we've been using a library thing catalogue to collate this material, and that's enabled us to work with it. And the next challenge is, as we move towards the end of the project, is thinking about where that's going to go or how that can be lodged, perhaps in a way which will enable access to other people. And there's various, as you might imagine, there are ethical issues around that, which we can talk more about if you're interested. So locating zines is the first thing that we've been doing. And then having located them, I guess we've been doing a lot of thinking with zines. And I'm using that phrase, we've been quite influenced work of art of Frank, which some people may have come across. He wrote a book called Letting Stories Breathe. And one of the ways in which he thinks about working with stories is the idea that as a researcher, you might be thinking with them rather than about them. And I guess in our case, we've been very keen to avoid any idea of reproducing a kind of diagnostic or pathologizing gaze on zines. So we've been working with them in all sorts of ways which kind of enable, so just to give an idea, I guess some zines are very explicitly articulating an argument or a position. So they might be contesting mental health through writing about ideas. And in those cases, we might be taking those ideas and seeing how we can work with them and how they might relate to other groups and individuals that we're in touch with. But some zines, and Hal's mentioned the kind of very tactile nature of zines. Some zines might be more, there might be more, they're conveying a feeling or an emotion. And there's one that I've been carrying around this week, which is just called "I Can't Even Keep My Plants Alive Anymore." And it's very, very short. It's very tactile. It's I've been carrying it in my diary, and I guess the ideas from it, but also the emotions from it, have been kind of working on me in different ways. So we're interested in that aspect of zines, and again, we can talk more about that. And then we've been thinking with zines in other ways in terms of our own research. So for instance, we've been developing a methodology that is, in some sense, that we came across the word recently, zinic, so that our research is not just about zines, but we're actually thinking about how we can embody some of the qualities of zines in the ways in which we're approaching the research. So we've been locating zines, we've been thinking with them, and we've also been crafting zines ourselves. So we've been making a range of zines within the project, sometimes working with ideas that we've come across. For instance, Arthur Frank's ideas that I just mentioned. Tamsin has been using and making zines as part of her data analysis process, so we can talk a bit more about that if people are interested in that. And we've also been crafting zines with other people. So recently we had a session with somebody who'd recently got hold of their medical notes for a period of a very difficult admission some years ago. And we were actually working with her on how she might make a zine out of that experience. And the third slide is just, the third picture in this slide is just showing a bit of how we some of the things that we were working through with her. And we've been making zines with groups of people. So for instance, we've run sessions with Mad Studies students at Northumbria University and Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh. So we've also been doing some work with local group in Lancaster, and we've got an event this Saturday, reimagining mental health, where we're going to be running zine workshops. So we've been locating zines, thinking with them, crafting them ourselves and with other people. And we've also been moving zines around, so introducing people who may not have come across zines. So we've been interested in the fact that zines are both an alternative to what can feel like a mainstream kind of monoculture, but they're also in themselves, the zine world can also be quite exclusive. So we've been trying to push the boundaries of that a bit. So for instance, when we ran the workshop at Queen Margaret University, we took a load of our the zines that we found and introduced those to people who hadn't come across zines before. And I guess in that sort of moving zines around, we've also been following zines around, in that since we started the project, all sorts of other people have been developing really interesting work around madness, mental health, distress, and zines. And so we've been trying to map some of that. So for instance, Lee Cooper's Take It Back project would be a good example of that. And obviously we can share some links to all of these things afterwards. So locating zines, thinking with them, crafting zines and moving and following zines around, I think that hopefully gives a bit of a flavour of some of what we've been doing over the last few years.
Do you want me to do this bit, Jill? Yeah. Yeah, I'm
don't mind. Yeah, I can carry on. So yeah, so I think as Hal mentioned, we're not kind of obvious this group, so we're not quite sure what are the things that you're likely to be most interested in. So we thought we'd like to open this up now for discussion. And we've just put a couple of pointers on this slide, but there may be other things too. So we were wondering about the use of zines in a higher education context, and thinking that there's probably interesting things to talk about, both around MadZines as a kind of as critical pedagogy. So the ways in which I've already mentioned the Mad Studies programmes, so the ways in which the development of Mad Studies might influence and link into the kind of work that you're doing. Also how zines might be used in professional social work, nursing, medical training, and also the ways in which zines open up new ways of engaging with and relating to material for all students, and sort of the ways in which they can help students take ownership of knowledge and material. And then also we thought a second area for discussion might be around MadZines as alternative ways of supporting students. So we've had links, for instance, with the Mad Student Society in Canada, and they've been producing zines in different ways. And there are obviously, we've been coming across a lot of zines which provide alternative ways into understanding the experience of other people. And I think often zines can feel very supportive in that way, in kind of addressing loneliness and the kind of sense of alienation and isolation that people can sometimes feel. So, and then I suppose kind of linking to both of those and all of what we've just discussed, I mentioned ethical issues, and I guess we're also acutely sort of alert to, particularly as Hal said, because zines are becoming so much more kind of in the public gaze again, and universities are picking up on zines, and so there are dangers around co-option, the way that something that has developed as a kind of on the fringes, as a way of giving voice to people who may not have other means of having their voices heard. There's a danger of that in some ways being marketized or co-opted. So that's something else we could talk about. So yeah, let's just throw it open then for comments or ideas.
Just do a final slide, which just some where if you want to follow us, we've done lots of blogs. We've written some blogs early on in the project, and we've also invited people to do guest blogs, and so we've also blogged about some of the workshops we've run and some of the events we've been to. So you can follow us on. We've got a little YouTube channel which we haven't put that much stuff on yet, but we've got a few videos on that. And we follow us on Twitter and also Instagram. So yeah, so hopefully something in what we've said will have sparked some questions or concerns or interests, and hopefully that's piqued your interest in some way. So we'd both be really happy to talk some more about any aspect of what we've touched on.
Thanks so much for sharing that with us. I will give people a couple of moments to perhaps think of questions, but I'll just come in with my own first, because this is something, especially around the ethics and the co-option of work, because it's something I'm acutely aware of from my experience in a Mad Studies group and also work with Mad COVID, the tendency that academia can have to take and not necessarily give voice to the people who are actually creating these things. I mean, my experience particularly was around the Stop Sim work. And yeah, so I'd be really interested to hear a bit more about your thoughts on the sort of co-option and how people can almost protect themselves from it, because, you know, creativity and creating things like Zines can be a really good way of, you know, staying well in itself for a lot of people, but actually with that knowledge that they might have and that fear, how might they navigate that?
I think it's a really great question. It's one of the most thorniest questions that we've been grappling with throughout the project. No, it's good. No, it's absolutely right. And I think we're also acutely aware that we could be part of the problem in that, you know, that we are in academia doing a funded project about zines, whereas, you know, by definition, zines are kind of unfunded grassroots. And we're also acutely aware that our project is part of that sort of making zines kind of part of the academy, if you like, and more PhD students are doing PhDs about zines. We can't claim to have anything to do with that particularly, but you know, and I think the ethics of it runs right through the project. So we've been right at the beginning, even before we got this funding, we worked quite closely with the UK and Ireland librarians zine group, and they've developed a code of ethics around librarians working with zines. So we've been working with Lee Cooper and Kirsty Fife around developing some similar guidelines, like using those as guidelines, but developing something similar for researchers. And the librarian's code of ethics is very clear about kind of people having people's permissions, and you know, there's a whole sort of set of guidelines which you can actually find on the UK librarians zine list, and it's an international, it's UK and Ireland, but it's had quite an international kind of reach. So it kind of touches on one of the things that Jill, I think, mentioned as well in her bit about one of the things we don't want to do with zines is kind of analyze their content as such. We don't want to kind of go, oh, this person is, and you know, this person is doing this in their zine in relation to their own mental health particularly. What we're more interested in how zines function to contest ideas about mental health, rather than, you know, like, you know, getting a zine about, I don't know, a diagnosis like borderline personality disorder and then saying, oh, this person is doing this. It's almost like a pathologizing lens even though it might be done in a more critical way, there's still something problematic about doing to people, you know, analyzing people rather than zines. So I think Jill's just gone out and come back in. Yeah, so we've been very clear that we didn't want to reproduce that dynamic in our research, but that's caused us some issues around, well, how do we work with the zines that we've got? Because obviously we want to do something with them, and so we have a group of zinesters that we're working quite closely with. For example, I mean, there's lots of them, but for example, Rachel Rowan Olive, who's done some fantastic work around zines, and we've got her permission to circulate some of her zines specifically. And we've been sort of recording some of, you know, how people have responded to that. But I mean, ethical issues run right through this project actually, and it's something we're very acutely aware of, and wanting to work closely with the zinesters that we're working with to make sure that they're happy with what we're doing with the zines that we're collecting. And that's an issue for our own collection as well that we've got, because often you just pick zines up as you're going along and you're not sure where they came from, and whether it's okay to put them in a MadZine library. It's kind of quite tricky. So there's all sorts of issues there that, you know, hugely problematic, but also I think shines a lens and light on what it is we're looking at, because those ethical issues run right through not only our project, but through zines, the whole culture of zines and zine making. I've realised Joe's got a hand up, so I don't want to kind of keep talking. I don't know if Jill, you want to say anything. I don't know if you're still here or if you've got some connection problems, but do you want to ask your questions, Joe?
Yes, hello. I will put my camera on so you can see me as I'm ask my question. Sorry, I'm just checking that there's no one stuck in the lobby. I was really interested to because one of the things that we have a researcher who has worked to put together something kind of akin to this zine, but it's online, but it's kind of cartoon image based representations of student mental health. And one of the things that I've been grappling with is that we talk about zine culture sometimes is kind of like more accessible, but obviously accessible is actually a really, really broad term. And a lot of the time it's a very visual resource. So have you encountered, and again, I know this might be something you've grappled with and that you haven't come up with an answer for, but have you found any examples of good work where the accessibility of zine culture is being enhanced so that actually maybe people who want to interact with it where they would find more simplified language easier, or they can't they have a visual impairment and kind of can't access that element of visual culture. Have you seen any good work in the sector kind of making things accessible in that side of things?
Yes, yes. There's a lot in that question, I think. So yeah, I'm trying to break it down. So there's the thing about
apologies, Age. I have a tendency to ramble. I think
don't worry.
I guess I mean we talk about being accessible, but maybe we overuse that term and forget some audiences.
Yes.
How have you found that as an ethical issue? And if it's something you're grappling with, have you seen any good work in the sector that has been helpful?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question, the whole issue of access, because it's really complicated, like you say, and people talk about accessibility, but there's so many different levels to that. And I think one of the things that we were drawn to zines around is the fact that for some people, they are more accessible because they use a variety of different cognitive styles, if you like. So they're not just like a book with lots of text in that has like a linear kind of narrative. So, you know, a zine might just have pictures in it, or might just have poems in it, or it might just have text in it, or it might have random sort of thoughts in it. So it kind of can appeal to different cognitive styles. And it's something that I think can resonate with people a lot more than, say, for example, academic work, which obviously resonates for some of us, but not all of us. And I've certainly found myself getting quite tired of a lot of academic sort of journal articles and stuff that seem so laboured in their arguments. And I read a zine and it seems to be much